Hello. In this video, I'll be going over the steps required to start up and fly the Sukhoi Su-27 in DCS World, as well as an introduction to its weapon systems. The first thing you'll need to do is download and install the provided control schemes for the X56 Logitech HOTAS, which is what will be used in this guide. Once you have done that, return back to this video, and we'll begin the list and startup process. Alright, unpausing the server here. The first thing we're going to do is turn on the electrical power by pressing right shift and L. You'll know it's on because you'll start to hear the beeps, you'll hear the radio, and you'll obviously see the lights come on in the cockpit. Next thing we're going to do is close the canopy with left control and C. You know it's coming down, you see the canopy come down, and it gets locked in place. Next thing you can do if you'd like is lower the mirrors around the canopy by pressing M on the keyboard. This is optional. I prefer to have it as it gives a little more information and you can just get a little more visibility. Alright, pausing the server again, we're now going to go over some of what you'll see in the cockpit. Starting on the left, looking down here, we'll see our gear and flaps indicator. You'll see 3 lights indicating the bottom. That indicates that our landing gear is down and locked. This is also indicated by the gear down light right here. Moving on, we have our pitch gauge. This gauge shows us our angle of our nose relative to the horizon. This gauge right here is very useful when flying through clouds or where you possibly don't have a view of the horizon, and it prevents getting disoriented. Just to the right of that, we have our roll gauge, indicated by this little dot here. That'll indicate how much our aircraft is rolled over. Then next to that, we have our RPM gauge. This goes in percent from 0 to 10, or 0 to 100, and it times 10 here in percentages. Right now it's off, so it's at 0%. This will go up when we turn on the engines. Just above that, we see these 2 lights. These will come on when our afterburners are on, which we will see during takeoff. Moving down, we have our fuel indicator. We have 2 bars here. You'll see we have total and feeder. Our total fuel is going to be our main tank. That goes all the way up to 9,000 kilograms of fuel. Once that gets down to 5,000, we'll start to see this feeder tank bar go down, as once we get below 5,000, we start feeding from our feeder tank. And once you see the feeder tank start going down, you should start thinking about getting more fuel. Moving up to this screen, we have our data link. This is not necessarily needed in the startup and takeoff process, but when we get to combat, this will prove extremely useful for situational awareness. Then moving on to the RWR. RWR stands for Radar Warning Receiver. This will tell us where we are getting radar scanned from. So right now you can see I'm getting 1 from behind me, and indicated by that green light and light behind that. And we can see at the bottom that is W. That indicates that it is an AWACS, or a big plane with a big radar on it in the back, that is scanning the whole area of this map. Now, most importantly, we're going to move on to the HUD. First off, below the HUD, you'll see this line of yellow lights. This indicates our pylons on the outside of the wings, or on the wings and underside of the plane. This indicates if they are occupied or not, and when we have weapons selected, you'll see a green light on the lights below that, indicating which pylon the selected weapon is on. Moving up to our main HUD, we are currently in our navigation mode. When you start the plane, it'll start up in its default navigation mode, and we'll see a couple of things. First off, most importantly, in the top left, we see our speed. This is going to be in kilometers an hour, and obviously you'll see it saying 80 while we are not moving. That is because it has a minimum speed of 80 kilometers an hour, so you will not see it increase until you hit 80 and exceed it, in which case it'll begin to go up in increments of 10. The triangle just below that indicates whether or not we are speeding up, slowing down, or remaining the same, based off where that triangle is. So since the triangle is in the middle right now, we are not changing speed. We are staying the same speed. If that triangle were to be on the left, we would be slowing down. If that triangle were to be on the right, we would be speeding up. In the middle, we have our heading, indicated with a triangle and numbers here. Shows you the heading of your aircraft. And then to the right of that, we have our altitude. Our altitude is going to be in meters. Right now, we can see that that is 2 with an R. That R indicates that that is our radar altitude. As we get up, we might start to see that number not have an R2 next to it. That'll indicate barometric altitude, which means that we are getting the altitude from air pressure rather than our radar. Looking here, on the left, we see this line with an arrow and a number, again, indicating our pitch angle. So again, this can be useful if you can't see the horizon. You can know your pitch angle by looking here. And then we'll also see some lines in the middle These will change with roll, which obviously you cannot really see that well because we are flat, but once we roll, we will see that change and that number move. And then this here indicates range to whatever we have targeted. Now that we know what we're looking at in the HUD, I'm going to unpause, and we are going to start our engines. So we are unpaused now. In order to start our engines, we're going to go over to the throttle, and we see switch 1 at the base of our throttle. We're going to flip that toggle up towards the symbol switch 1. Doing this, we'll see 2 lights come on in the cockpit. Going to go into active pause here. We'll see 2 lights come in on the cockpit saying left start and right start. This indicates that the engines are starting. Unpausing, we'll see our RPM needle begin to increase as the engines spool. You'll also notice the temperatures increase. This isn't necessarily important, but it could just be another indicator that your engines are indeed on. We're going to wait for these engines to spool, and while we do that, we're going to do a couple other things. First thing we absolutely need to do is turn on nose wheel steering. Nose wheel steering is essentially the system that allows us to steer our plane on the ground. It does this by twisting the front nose. So what we're going to do is press button 5 on the joystick, which is going to be found at the back. By pressing that, we can now move the front wheel. To confirm this, we can go in to our third person view by pressing F2 on the keyboard. Once we're in F2, we can twist the joystick to apply rudder, and we can confirm that the front wheel is also turning. If we were to have the system off, we would see the rudders deflect when I twist the joystick, but the front wheel not deflecting with them. Turning it back on, we'll see we're twisting. You can get back to the cockpit view by pressing F1 on the keyboard. Another optional input would be to press Control on the right side of your keyboard and Enter. This will pop up a little thing in the bottom right of your screen that will show our inputs. So you can see if I twist the stick, you see in the bottom my rudder inputs change. Pitch will change right there, roll here, and then throttle on the left. Next thing we need to do is plan out our path to the runway. We can do this by pressing F10 on our keyboard, going up here and pressing center on plane, and you can also turn off health bars if you want a little less clutter, and then zooming in. This will show us our location on the map, and you can see our airfield that we are at. If I want to get to this runway, all I need to do is go straight here, and then make a left onto the runway. Now that we've got that, let's go ahead and deploy our flaps. To do that, we hold left shift on the keyboard and press F. We'll know the flaps are on because if we look down to our gear and flap indicator, we see 2 green lights come on under the diagram of the plane. That indicates that our flaps are down. We can also confirm this in third person by looking at the back of our wings and seeing the flaps are down. Another important note here, if you'd like to zoom in and out, that's going to be on the wheel on the top of the throttle. Simply twisting it clockwise will zoom out, counterclockwise will zoom in. And now that we know that, we are ready to begin our taxi. So, to begin our taxi, we're simply going to push forward on the throttle, and we'll see the RPM gauge increase as we do so. Once you hit about 80% RPM, you'll begin to move forward. It's important to note, you don't really want to exceed 90% throttle while you're on the ground because you'll begin to go a little too fast. Also important, try not to exceed 80 kilometers an hour. So if you see your speed indicator go above 80, you can back off and I'll hit button 6, which is going to be that trigger on the back, on the base on the back of the joystick. That'll apply the brakes, and you can see in the bottom right, the brakes being applied there. And just go slow. Use your rudder input to steer. Try to stay as centered as you can. Then right here, we're going to kill the throttle, hit the brakes to slow down. And we're going to turn onto the runway. Cleared for takeoff. We're not going to take off yet. Make sure you hold the brakes, come to a complete stop on the runway. Now we're going to pause the game. We're going to do our final checklist to make sure we are ready to take off. First thing we want to do, double check that flaps are indeed down. And we can see right here they are, or you can go into third person and confirm that as well. Next, You can turn off nose wheel steering now if you'd like, but I would recommend leaving it on till we hit about 100 to 120 kilometers an hour. This is because we don't want it on when we're going too fast, as if we need to make corrections, we'll likely overcorrect while we're on the ground, causing us to possibly lose control in the one-way. But we might want to keep it on when we're slow, because if we have it off, corrections will be done via the rudder, and at low speed, the rudder will not have enough power to apply the needed correction. Now that we know that, we should be ready to take off. So I'm going to go ahead and unpause the game. Okay, wait for these radio messages to clear. And once we're ready, we're going to push throttle all the way to 100%. We see the RPM gauge increase all the way up to 100%. And we see two lights come on in the bottom. Those are going to be our afterburner lights, as you can see right there. Afterburn left, afterburn right. We want those on for now for takeoff, because they will provide us with substantial extra power, but they also consume a lot more fuel. Unpausing. We start to see our speed increase. So now I'm going to turn off nose wheel steering and continue to roll. We are loaded, so I'm going to go past, but if you were unloaded, pull back there at 250. I'm going to now pull back at 300, and just like that, we are off the ground. Now that we're off the ground, we're going to press G and F. I'm going to go ahead and pull an active pause here. We can see our indicators have turned off in the bottom left. As we see that red light, that is indicating gear in transit. If we go into third person, we can see that the gear is up, but maybe not locked, so that is why our gear in transit is still there. We can see our speed is now 420, and we are airborne. You'll start to see the nose wanting to rise. In order to counter this, we're going to use the witch hat labeled H1 on the joystick, and we're going to push that forward. That's going to apply nose down trim, nose down trim essentially continuously applies nose down input from the joystick, but without you needing to do it. And we'll see on the right there, our pitch indicator beginning to come down, and eventually we'll have to adjust this trim. As you can see, too much will start to go nose down, but as we increase our speed, we'll have to apply more and more until eventually we can just leave it at full trim and we should fly pretty straight. I'm gonna go ahead and pause the game here, as that is the end of part 1, the process of starting up and taking off the plane. Congratulations, you're now flying the Sukhoi Su-27. Alright, now that we're done with that, we're going to move on to part 2, which is going to be about our weapon systems. So, now that we're in the air, we're going to take this time to go over what weapon systems we have on board the Sukhoi 27. To do this, I'm going to go into third person, and we're going to look at what we have on our wings here. So, as you can see, we have a variety of missiles, as you can tell by the different shapes and colors. And we're going to start on our wingtips and go inboard from there. So, starting on the wingtips, we see two pods. These are going to be ECM jammers. The purpose of these pods is to jam enemy radar signals. This can help prevent you from getting locked onto and help prevent the enemy from launching a missile from a longer range. These things don't make you invincible, however, as there is a burn-through range, which is the point in which enemy aircraft, their radar will just be able to burn through your jamming, and they will be able to acquire a weapons grade lock on you. Another downside to these ECM pods is that when they are on, they are constantly emitting a signal. So if you have your jammers on, there is no being stealthy. Everyone can see where you are. Moving inboard from there, just inside, just closer off the wingtips, we have the smallest of our 3 missiles on board, the R-73, codename AA-11. This missile is going to be a short-range heat seeker, and it's going to be mostly used for dogfights. It's going to have the shortest range, like I said, of the 3 we have on board, but it's also going to have the most maneuverability. This missile is extremely hard to dodge, and likely cannot be dodged. It is somewhat weak to flares. This missile can be flared, being a heat seeker, but if you fire it before flares are deployed and at a close enough range, it should find home. This missile is not going to be utilized as much as our other 2, since due to its short range, it is very situational. Moving just inside of that, we have one of two R-27 variants on board the Su-27. This one that you can see with the red seeker tip is the R-27ET. That the ET stands for Extended Range Thermal Tracking. What that means is it has a longer burn time and it goes a little bit faster than the normal R-27, and it uses infrared seeking. This is probably your best missile you have on board the aircraft, as it has the longest range, as well as it can be launched without notifying the enemy aircraft. This can be done as you do not need a radar lock to launch this missile. All you need is to use your heat seeker to find the enemy plane, acquire a lock, and launch it, which is all passive. You are not emitting any radar signals in doing that. So it can be a very useful missile to stay stealthy and get kills on enemies that don't even know you're there. Moving just inside of that, we have our second R-27 variant, the ER. The E standing for the same thing of extended range, but the R standing for radar tracking. This missile is going to be pretty comparable to the ET, despite it will have a slightly shorter range, but the trade-off for that is going to be a little bit more consistent tracking. Since we have a radar guidance system, all we need is a radar lock, and this missile should be able to acquire a lock from very far distances. That is one weakness of the ET, is that you have to be able to see the aircraft. So, for example, the aircraft in this mission, being A-10 Warthogs, which are not equipped with afterburners, are not emitting that much heat, and so our ET might have a hard time utilizing its full range, as it just won't be able to see the enemy target. That is not a problem we'll have with the radar variant of the R-27. The one major downside of the R-27ER is that it is what we call a Fox 1 missile. That means it uses semi-active radar homing system to track its target. You don't need to know what that means. All you really need to know is that in order for this missile to track its target, you have to maintain a radar lock the entire time of flight, from launch to impact. If at any point you lose lock, the missile will not be able to track its target. This is because it is an older style of tracking that does not have its own onboard radar, and so it requires the mothership's radar to track. Alright, that being said, let's go back into the cockpit with F1, and let's get ready to use the weapon systems. The very first thing we need to do is get out of our navigational mode and into our combat mode. In order to do this, I'm going to unpause the game here and go into an active pause, allowing me to still make modifications to the aircraft. I'm also going to pull back my throttle just to turn off my afterburners for now. What I'm going to do is on my stick, I'm going to look for the hat labeled POV on the stick, and I'm going to press up. You see, that changed our HUD, and now we see the words BVR in the bottom left and R27ER in the bottom right. That indicates we are in BVR mode, and we have the R27ER selected. As I mentioned earlier, you'd be able to see which pylon that is on. That is indicated now here. As you can see by the green lights, our R27ERs are going to be on the middle 4 pylons. And going into third person, we can see that that is true. In order to actually take advantage of this mode, we need to turn on our radar. To turn on our radar, we press I on the keyboard. You'll see a number of things appear on the screen. First off, we will see our radar scope. That is going to be what's in between those two lines. We can see our cursor in the middle, which can be moved using the Witch Hat 2, labeled H2, on the stick. Simply move that around in the direction you like to move it, and that can move around our cursor. We'll also see some new things appear. Most important one is probably going to be right here. That 50 is indicating the range our radar is looking. Or that's indicating the range of our radar here. Below that is ILV. That stands for interleave. That is simply the mode of our radar. For this guide, we're not really going to concern ourselves with changing the frequency mode that our radar is in. We're just going to leave it in interleave, as it can generally be used at all times. Below that we have RL. That indicates that we are in radar. And below that we see SCN. That stands for scan, indicating that we are in scan mode. Below that we see ILL. That is again indicating that the radar is on. One thing to note that you can do if you'd like, and I mentioned somewhat earlier, is that you can just you don't need your radar to acquire locks. Su-27 has an EO targeting system, as you can see indicated by EO over here now. This is just utilizing this little node on the nose just in front of the cockpit right there, which is essentially a big heat seeker that is just looking way out there for heat signatures, you can use that to acquire locks without sending out radar waves, but your range might take a hit. So we're going to leave on the radar by pressing I. Alright, next thing we're going to do is going to look down here at our data link. You can see a couple things. One, you can see the cone right there. That is indicating the range of our missile. In order to switch on our missile, we are going to press on our throttle, button 5. That's going to be on the side. We press that, we can see we now are on the R-73s, which are going to be on those pylons, and the R-27ET on those pylons. Switching the missiles, we can see the cone change. R-27 is going to be these two, as you can see, and then that's the R-73 with our shortest range. We can zoom in and out of our data link by plus and minus on our keyboard. Pressing minus, we see a couple more things come up when we zoom out. First thing we'll notice is that triangle, two triangles with lines coming out of them, and a circle with a line coming out of it. Triangles indicate enemies. So those two are going to be enemy aircraft. Circles indicate friendlies. This is extremely important to avoid friendly fire incidents. So this is how you find targets. Look for enemies by the triangles and the lines. The other two lines indicate relative airspeed and altitude. And now that we know that, we're going to unpause. We're going to switch back to our R-27ETs, and we are going to turn, keeping our eye on the data link, so that we are facing those enemy targets. We're also going to push our throttle forward to engage our afterburner. This is because we want to be as fast as we can before we launch these missiles. The faster we launch the missile, the faster the missile will come off the rail. Alright. Now that we are looking and facing the targets, we're going to pause. Looking at the HUD, we see a couple new things. We see two lines made of two squares. These indicate radar targets. We can now see them on our radar. The number of squares that we see indicates the wingspan of the plane. So something like a fighter or an attack aircraft like we're looking at is going to have 2 squares. Something like an AWACS or a bomber might have up to 4. In order to lock these targets, we're going to unpause, and we're going to use our H21. We're going to navigate the cursor over one of these targets. We're going to pick the closest to the two as it is lower down on the screen, meaning it is a little closer. We're going to put the cursor over it and press button 2 on the stick. It's going to be the button on top. Doing this, we see a couple of things come up. One, we can see that we no longer have the cursor, and that is replaced now by a circle. That circle is going to be over our target. We also see a couple of other things. I'm going to go ahead and put an active pause so we can see what we're looking at. Right here, we've got a range scope at 25, and then 3 bars. These 3 bars are very important. That topmost bar is the maximum range of our missile. That second middle bar is going to be our lethal range, and that low bar is going to be our minimum range. We also see that SCN has turned into ATK, indicating we're in attack, and something new has appeared just above that, being an A. That A indicates that it is an enemy. This is what we call IFF. It stands for Identify Friend or Foe. If that were an enemy, we would see more there. It would say something more than just A. It would be 3 letters, not just the letter A. We're going to go ahead and unpause here and turn back in towards our target. So right now, as you can see, we have the R-27ET selected. This is going to be our longest range missile and a heat seeker. We can also see on our data link that we are coming in behind this target. That means that our ET is looking straight out the back of these engines, and we're going to have the best chance of getting the lock on him. So you can see him just appear there. He's about 10 miles out, and we keep going. And now as we're seeing this arrow come past that first bar, we are now within minimum range. However, our missile still cannot see the target. So, there it is. Now it can. So we see 2 letters, LA, appear in the bottom. Those stand for launch authorization. That means if we squeeze in this trigger, if we press and hold the trigger right now, it will fire a missile. And so, that is exactly what we're going to do. We are going to press the trigger and hold it. You hear the missile come off the rail, and there it goes. And once that missile is fired, it starts tracking. But, as I said, that's a heat seeker, and it just went for flares. So our missile missed, and he turns back in on us. So, now that our missile's missed, we can either fire again, or we can switch missiles to something different. So as you can see, we only have one bar left. That means we are basically in the minimum range of this missile. We might have more luck with a shorter range missile, but we're going to try the same one. So unpausing, we're going to fire this missile, and it goes for flares again. Alright, I went ahead and restarted the mission so that we have a better chance, or a better angle on attacking these enemy aircraft. As you can see, I've now got them off my nose and locked on radar. This time I'm going to have the R-27ER selected, just because this one cannot be flared since it is guided by radar, as flares don't do anything against radar missiles since they have no heat seeking. We're going to go ahead and unpause this game, and we're going to look. We can see that arrow getting closer and closer to those 3 bars. Once it gets within that first bar, we should receive launch authorization to lock, but I'm not going to shoot it yet. I'm going to wait until it gets within that second bar. Like I said, have afterburners on, trying to get as fast as possible before we launch this missile. You can see we're gaining a lot of speed here, and that arrow is getting closer and closer. You also might notice the bars getting closer to the arrow as well. That is because as we gain speed, we are effectively increasing the range of the missile, because we're giving it more speed off the rail. So you can see we kind of capped out here on speed at about 1250. We're not really gaining much. We're now seeing this come across that first bar, and boom, there is launch authorization. So I could fire this missile now if I wanted, but I'm going to wait until it gets a little more lethal, get a little closer, as he is still about 20 miles off my nose, or 20 kilometers. Getting closer. And as soon as that arrow crosses that second bar, I'm going to squeeze and hold the trigger to send that missile on its way. So now, squeeze and hold that missile. There it goes. Like I said, we have to keep a lock the entire time. He's going to try to evade this missile, but evading missiles isn't usually a great plan. And that's going to smack him. And there we go. And that's all it is. That is one enemy A-10 down. As you can see, there's another one in there off to my right. A turn to engage him. And this guy is in for a bad day. We got him on radar. We're going to go ahead and lock him up. And send another missile on his way. There it goes. He's probably not going to dodge this one. Smack. It looks like he might be okay. So we're going to switch over to a short-range missile and make sure he gets on the ground. And he's going to flare that. So we're going to switch to guns. Just make this look pretty. And there we go. And that is how you use the weapon systems in the Sukhoi 27. It's important to keep using what you've learned here, keep practicing, learn the intricacies of the weapons, learn where they're useful, learn their weaknesses, and learn how to win the fight.